Sweet, sharp, deadly one bite sealed a killer's fate. Welcome to Wolfe Mysteries. I'm your host, thrilled to hear from new listeners. Tell me where you're tuning in from. Your presence adds zest to every tale. Let's unravel this one. It started with a lemon tart. Not a metaphor, literal pastry, delicate, golden, and probably sinful by Wolfe's dietary standards. It was handed to me by a woman who looked like she could have baked it or killed with it, maybe both. I was halfway through cataloging the week's bills when she appeared at the doortelish, sporting a feathered hat that seemed to have fought a vintage millinery in one. With eyes that said her smile was strictly optional, she didn't offer a name, just thrust the tart forward and said, "He'll want to taste it." Then stood there like she expected rose petals and a trumpet fanfare. "Lady," I said, holding the pastry like it might bite, "if this is a bribe, you're aiming high." He once turned down a six-figure retainer because the client wore mauve. Her mouth twitched her version of amusement. "Tell him it's about her. He'll know." That got my attention. Most people seeking Nero Wolfe bring checkbooks, sob stories, or trouble. This one brought citrus and a cryptic pronoun, dropped like a live grenade. I carried the tart inside like it was evidence because it might have been. Wolfe was in the plant rooms, of course, which gave me exactly 22 minutes before I could disturb him without getting barked at like a Saint Bernard with a sinus infection. I used the time to sniff the thing, checking for cyanide overtones, and wondered if we'd just met a refined poisoner or the most passive-aggressive baker in Manhattan, when Wolfe finally descended into the dining room black suit, the yellow vest, and a sort of frown that could put butter into therapy. I presented the tart on a saucer like a good butler in a bad farce. He stared at it, then at me. "It's not my birthday, and it's not yours," explained, delivered with no card. I said, "Woman tall, French perfuming and accent. She wore like a scarf light and expensive, said you'd want to taste it, said it was about her." His eyes narrowed like blinds being drawn against a rising sun. That's when I knew the capital H in her was doing work Wolfe never liked personal pronouns unless they were directed at himself. So when he accepts one without clarification, you can bet it's because clarification hurt. Didn't touch the tart, not yet, just sat, steepled his fingers, and murmured "fine," which, if you're new here, is Wolfe for everything from how tiresome to a foundational betrayal of the Republic. In this case, I guessed it meant we are no longer alone in this matter. "Call her back," said finally, with a tone that suggested he was placing an order. At Rustman's, not summoning a mystery woman with a citrus agenda. I shall see her in the office. That right there told me we weren't dealing with a client. Clients get vetted. Clients get fees. Swaz anything else, maybe a ghost, maybe an old debt, maybe just someone with the power to get Nero Wolfe to forego his usual levels of inertia. Didn't ask questions yet, but he noted the slice he finally cut into the tart, and the fact that he didn't complain once about the crust that wasn't a compliment or a warning. 15 minutes later, the lady was back sitting in Wolfe's office like she owned the building and had just gotten bored of the deed. Her name, when she finally gave it, was Genevieve Worley, and judging by the way Wolfe looked at her as if she'd walked out of an unpleasant memory and into his orchid sanctuary, I knew this wasn't going to baboot lemon. It was going to be about something a hell of a lot more. Bitter Genevieve Worley sat like she'd never sat improperly a day in her life, which made her choice of seat in Wolfe's office all the more telling. She didn't take the red armchair we reserved for clients. No chouette, straight for the damscap back chair near the bookshelves, just to the left of the globe. Wolfe never spins. That chair isn't exactly off limits, but it's not on the usual menu. The move said she knew the room and its owner, I stayed standing. Wolfe hadn't asked me to sit, and besides I wasn't done sizing her up. She had the kind of face that would be called handsome before. It was called pretty high cheekbones, a deliberate jawline, and a mouth that knew its way around both a compliment and a lie. She wore a tailored coat, the color of ash on slate, and a little gold brooch shaped like a rosebud, delicate, deceptive, and too symbolic for coincidence. Wolfe, of course, didn't greet her. He doesn't greet people, permits them. He allowed her presence, the way a lion might permit a sparrow into its den out of curiosity. Not Charity. She looked around the office like a widow, inspecting an old estate, then locked eyes with Wolfe. "So you haven't redecorated?" "I see you have," Wolfe said mildly. She smiled. It wasn't warm. "You never did care for fashion, nor falsehood," he replied. "Well, Tats calculated." She didn't flinch. "I'm not here to stir old sediment, Nero." Wolfe's eyes narrowed, just slightly then. "Don't use first names." That was my cue to cut in. We might need a program. "Here you two know each other." Genevieve didn't look at Miance briefly once. Wolfe echoed was enough. Theron paused. You could feel it, the way a piano waits before the next chord. Then she reached into her purse and produced a small black envelope, not sealed, no monogram. She laid it on Wolfe's desk, like porn before a queen. "It's not for you, it's for her again." I said, "We're going to need a roster that got me a look cool, sharp, and probably deserve it." It wasn't from her, it was from Wolfe. He didn't open the envelope. Instead, he looked at Genevieve as if he was still trying to decide whether she was part of the problem or the problem itself. "Explained," the T said, finally. Genevieve exhaled once, as though she'd been expecting this moment and regretting it in equal measure. "There's a girl," she said. "Her name is Claire Leventhal. She's 27. My goddaughter." That explains the pastry, I muttered. Wolfe gave me a fractional nod, which in Wolf speak means not now. "Archie, Genevieve continued, Claire is in trouble. The Kinju won't read about in tomorrow's paper, but it could become that very quickly legal trouble." Wolfe asked, "Worse social?" That word hit the room like a cough. In a court room, Wolfe hated social entanglements, vague, slippery things with no statute or standard of evidence. It stepped closer. "What's she done?" Genevieve hesitated. "Nothing. That's the trouble. But Somione wants it to look otherwise. They've been maneuvering her, isolating her, setting traps." "She ends?" I asked. "No, she said worse. She's talented. They got a blink out of me." Wolfe, of course, didn't move. "She's a pastry chef," Genevieve said. "Just started working at a private culinary incubator, one of those startup kitchens for boutique food ventures, the kind that's funded by people who never touch a stove. Someone sabotaging her quietly, intelligently, and effectively. You have proof?" Wolfe asked. Genevieve opened her bag again and produced a slim file, not a folder. This was personal, not professional. Clippings, mails, a few snapshots. One showed Claire at a culinary competition, mid-pour, on allemande glaze, looking focused and radiant. Another showed a mangled tart, crust collapsed, citrus filling bleeding across the plate. "Like a crime scene, she's being set up to fail," Genevieve said. "And if she does, it won't just be failure, it'll be disgrace. Public, professional, permanent." "And what do you want of me, Wolfe?" asked. Genevieve smiled, and it wasn't sweet. "You know exactly what." He went. "I want you to find out who's doing this and stop them." Wolfe glanced at Tart, still on its dish, still half untouched. "You presume?" he said, quiet like that. "I care." "No," she said. "I presume that you're still the manual taught me that ideas are sacred, but execution is art." She has the art, Yahave. The execution silence. Wolfe didn't speak, but I saw it micro shift in posture, the faint downturn of his mouth, the blink that took half a second too long. This wasn't about a pastry chef. This was about him. I broke the silence with a question. Said she was being maneuvered. Any suspects? Genevieve tilted her head. For maybe 5, all in her kitchen. Collective, a chef, a supplier, abusing his partner, a marketing director, and possibly the building manager. Quite the tasting menu, I said. Wolfe closed high size. I waited. Then I will not leave this house, he said, to no one in particular, of course. Not. Genevieve said. That's why I brought Archie. I cleared my throat. Yatwo. Always plan things without me, or is this just a Thursday special? Genevieve gave me her first real smile. You're charming, Mr. Goodwin, but you'll charm won't get you far with these people. They're immune to it. I shrugged. So is he. I managed. Wolfe opened his eyes. Very well, I will take the case just like that. I didn't show it, but I felt it. Something had just shifted in the house. Wolfe doesn't take cases based on feelings. He takes them for structure, for challenge, for logic. But this wasn't about logic. This was about Claire Leventhal. And maybe, just maybe, about Genevieve Worley too. She stood, smoothed her coat, and nodded. You'll see, she said. It's not about the tart. It's about the trap. Then she left. The door clicked behind her, like the end of a sentence. Wolfe didn't move. I waited, then said, she was important to you. He didn't answer. Instead, he said, find out everything you can about the kitchen, its members, their motives, and the girl. He glanced at the gelatin tart, and the girl. I nodded, grabbed my coat, and headed for the door outside. The city smelled of spring and secrets. I had a lemon tart in my gut, a list of suspects in my pocket, and a hunch that something wasn't just sour. It. What's Curdle? Would you like to proceed with the next morning? Found me 2 espresso shots deep and standing in the industrial lobby of a Soho brownstone that had been turned into what the broadsheet called a culinary co-laboratory. I had no idea what that meant, but he assumed it involved artisanal bread, ambition, and very sharp knives. The place was called Pavona Italian for peacock, because apparently naming your kitchen after a loud flightless bird is branding now. Genevieve had gotten me a visitor's pass though. I had to pretend to be a food investor named Martin Denton who was exploring boutique gastronomy. Verticalcy. Didn't know what that meant either, but I said it with confidence and no badiste. For a business card, the first thing I noticed was the silence. Kitchens aren't supposed to be quiet. They hum, clatter, hiss, and swear, but this place was muted, like someone had lowered the volume on ambition. Claire Leventhal was in Kitchen Bay 3, a small space tucky bend, a glass partition, plated in brushed steel, and Anxietish was hunched over a copper saucepan, whisking something lemon-colored with surgical precision. She had short curls, chef's jacket with her name embroidered too neatly to be accidental, and the kind of expression that meant she'd bitten her tongue for the last 3 weeks. Wasn't sure what she'd say if she stopped. I didn't approach her yet. Wolfe had been clear, observe, first disturb later. So I took the tour. There were furthers sharing the kitchen floor, and in the interest of building our rogues gallery, I'll introduce them the same way they introduced themselves to me, reluctantly and with something to hit a mellow. Crane, the star chef Crane, ran Kitchen Bay 1, and you could tell the walls were covered and framed. Press clippings, including a New York foodie profile that called him the bad boy of balsamic. He had a jaw like a soup can, and the kind of arms that looked like the beat dough and people. Equally well introduced myself. He looked at my shoe stand, my face then, my non-existent investment portfolio. You're with Genevieve, he asked, indirectly. I said, looking into culinary growth. He snorted. She always was a romantic. Thinks pastry is poetry, and you don't. He pulled a duck confit out of the oven, and didn't answer, just muttered, Claire's good, maybe too good. That was Clue Language, filed it to Trina Shaw, the marketing director. Trina didn't have a station. She had a desk in the glass-walled mezzanine overlock, The bays, decorated like an Instagram influencer with minimalist tastes, wore a matte black jumpsuit and a silver stylus behind one ear like a dagger. She smiled at me like I'd just overcooked her brand identity. Genevieve told me. "You might stop by," she said. She didn't mention what you're fishing for. Neither did I. I said, her smile twitched. "This is about Claire. It's a misunderstanding," meaning she's oversensitive if a tart plops. She thinks it's sabotage if someone criticizes her plating. She hears conspiracy. She's not imagining the issues. I said, "Everyone here has issues," Trina replied. "This is Sana Bakery. It's a battlefield." I liked her immediately, not personally, but for Thiefile Rohan Bell, the supplier. Rohan was young-bearded and had the posture of a man who'd spent too much time defending organic citrus from skeptical investors. He supplied Pavanette with curated produce from upstate farms. I caught him delivering blood oranges and microgreens out back. "Claire," he said after I introduced myself. "She's sharp, Jew." "Sharp, maybe you mean talented. I mean intense. She doesn't smooth people." Note aside, I nodded. "Ever seen anything weird happen to her orders?" He hesitated. "There was a batch of eggs last week. Looked fine. Turned out most were cracked microfractures, not visible from the outside. Could have wrecked occurred if he didn't catch it fast." "Did she?" He smiled, barely stubbled. "She'd most wouldn't have. He liked her. That made me mark him down for further scrutiny. Loyalty makes for bad alibis." Derek Fallon, the partner. Technically, Fallon was Claire's co-founder. They'd started a dessert concept called Citronade, pitched as a neoclassic citrus experience. Wolfe would have thrown a tomato at that phrase, but Derek was tall, elegant, and wore shoes that cost more than my rent, so he pretended to be impressed. "Claire's a genius," he said, "but geniuses are fragileschi. Think someone's targeting her. I think it's stress. Stress breaks her oven temperature sensors." He blinked to shittle to you about that she didn't have to. Fallon leaned in. "Look, I don't think your known here is malicious, but Pavan is competitive. Chefs burn out fast. Claire is sensitive." That was the second time I'd heard the word sensitive used like an insult. I didn't buy it. Simone Dalla, the manager last on the list, was the building manager. Simone ran logistics for Pavanatand. Looked like she'd been carved out of espresso foam and deadlines. Short hair, steel framed glasses, clipboard always in hand. She gave me 5 minutes. "No more chef drama isn't my problem," she said. "I run operations, not therapy, but you monitor the kitchen. Cams, yes, but only for equipment safety theft, not sabotage anything strange." Recently, she stared at us. "It's New York strange. It's Tuesday." I asked about access logs. She gave me a look. They made it clear she'd need a subpoena or a sincere flirtation. He wasn't in the mood for either by the time I circled back to Claire. She plated something elegant and pale. Kia, yellowish, didn't look up. "You're not a food investor," she said. "No, Kita, I'm a guy who works for someone who likes orchids, beer, and mental puzzles." "You're the puzzle." She finally looked at Medvedev. "Sent you." She did. "Then you already know the answer. Someone wants Magan." Quietly, untraceably, with plausible deniability and a smile. I paused. "You'll think they'll ruin your reputation. I think they'll erase it." She handed me a tasting spoon. I sampled feathered light, perfect balanced on the razor edge between sweet and sour. "This suggests dessert." I said no. She said softly, "It's proof." Back at the brownstone, I laid out my findings to Wolfe, who sat behind his desk, chewing slowly on a peach. When I finished, he grunted. "They're all plausible, yeah, but none of them arrest a pid. That's the trouble. Stupidity is not a requirement for guilt," said Just. "Frequent companion. What's the move?" He leaned back. "Something has been taken from Miss Leventhal. Perhaps not an object, but something. We must find it." I frowned. "You think this is about more than sabotage?" "I think Wolfe said that this isn't a matter of talent. It is a matter of trust." I stared at him. Then, what's next? Looked toward the hallway. I will have Fritz inventory our kitchen that got more kitchen. Yes? He said, I suspect this began with the tart. Would you like to proceed with? When? Wolfe tells Fritz, to inventory, the kitchen, it's the culinary. Equivalent of DEF CON to Fritz. Takes it as a personal affront. You'd think we'd accused him of harboring contraband, or worse. Off-brand butter. By the time he made it to the kitchen that afternoon, he had every spice, jar, flour, tin, and citrus bill lined up like recruits at a military inspection. I've seen battleships, less organized. Everything isn't its place. Fritz said stiffly, no jar switched, no ingredients spoiled. I would know. You probably would, said. But check anyway. Something's off. Wolfe thinks wait first. Happening to Claire Leventhal might have started with that tart. Fritz frowned. It tasted fine. That's the problem. I said too fine for sabotage. It was a little too precise. Fritz muttered something. In German that I won't translate, partly because I don't speak German, but mostly because the tone didn't need subtitles. Lift him to it and headed back into the field. There was something sticking to this case, like powdered sugar on a black suit. Wolfe could smell it, and it wasn't lemon. I had 3 goals. For the afternoon follow-up with Claire, sniff out inconsistencies among the kitchen crew and see if anyone flinched when I mentioned a tart. Claire Leventhal too. She met me at a sidewalk cafe in the village under protest. Yao shouldn't be following me, she said. It makes this feel worse. It's opposed to isolate. Fear sharpens the senses. She stared at her coffee. Did Wolfe send you wood? I'd hear if he didn't. She gave a small smile. Fair. We got down to it. I asked about her relationship with the suspects. One by one, here's what I got. Milo Crenay's respected. He's also a control freak. He thinks everything below Flan is beneath him. Trina, sharp. Sharp, too sharp. She treats branding like it's war. Once told me lemon wasn't luxury enough. Roanne, Bell, we talk. He's been kind, but he gets switchy when you ask about delivery errors. Derek Fallon, long pause. We wear friends' clothes now. He's different, Simone. Doka, efficient, cold, like the building gets out. Everything works, but you don't ask how I pushed on Derek. Different how? He used to back me on everything. Now he second guesses, hesitates. We had apricot tart go wrong last month. He claimed the acidity was off, but never changed the formula. And was it no, she said firmly, but the eggs were weird. The texture was wrong. I didn't notice until I was baked, filed that away under sabotage subtle, and moved on to Theodore's Trina Shaw. The taste of doubt back at Pavanette. I caught Trina scrolling through her product shoot on her iPad, adjusting shadows and filters, like she was retouching a movie star. Not a fruit tart back again, she said. Still shopping for investments, or has Genevieve hired you to sniff out phantoms, let's say? I'm testing for mold. She arched an eyebrow. You won't find it here. Maybe not in your pastries, but maybe in your personnel. I dropped Claire's name. Her posture stiffened. She's talented, she admitted, but she's not a team player. Won't adapt, doesn't think. Marketing should have input. Maybe marketing shouldn't. She gave me a tight smile. This is Manhattan. Image is half the product, and the other half survived. Was a little too honest. I made a note. Derek Fallon, old friends. Cold tension, I found. Derek in the conference room, sipping ginger tea and peering at a spreadsheet, like it might punch him. He didn't look thrilled to see me. You said Claire was paranoid. I began, but everything she's worried about is actually happening. Faulty. I quote meant sabaged. Ingredients. He sighed. I don't want this to blow up. Then help me contain it. Has anyone had access to her workstations outside regular hours? He hesitated. Maybe Milo. Sometimes borrows her stand mixer. That's personal, it's communal space. I leaned forward. You're hiding something? No, he said. Just remembering things. I'd rather forget. That line rang out like a bod lyric. He didn't elaborate. Milo Crane, The brute chef, he didn't like me asking about Claire. He liked it even less when brought up the tart. I've never touched her ingredients, he barked. She's territorial. Then, how did you know the mixer was hers? Because she won't shut up about it, he snapped. You try working next to a girl who treats K-whites like religion. Was there tension? He shrugged. She's too good to fail naturally, so if she's failing, it means someone's pushing. That almost sounded like a confession, but it wasn't his style. Milo wasn't subtle enough for sabotage. He'd burn your tart and then dare you to complain some more. Dela, the watcher, semi-definitely agreed to show me the hallway logs. Turns out, Pavinette has RFID tags, anal staffers. Every kitchen bay logs entries and exits. Claire's bay shows a midnight entry. 3 days ago, she said, no scheduled use, no permission. Who was Itch? Showed me the data. Derek. Fallon. No explanation, no note, just a quiet little digital fingerprint. I left with more questions than answers, and one clearly back at the brownstone. I laid it all out. Wolfe sat with his hands folded, eyes closed, as I walked him through each interview, every shift in tone, every twitch behind a suspect's smile. When I finished, he didn't move for 10 seconds. Then Mr. Fallon entered her bay at midnight. No scheduled prep, no meetings a budge by implication. Wolfe murmured, not conclusive, but useful, I think. It's a triangle, I said. Claire, Derek, and one wild card. He nodded. There is no shortage of envy in kitchens. Then he turned to his desk, opened the Tart file, and pulled a photo. This, he said, pointing, is not her usual glaze to glossy reflective. Think someone altered it. No, I think someone replicated it. He set the photo down with finality, Sun Yan skying her closely, deliberately enough to create confusion, and then collapse. I stared at him. To what end? To replace her, he said, or destroy her. Then, without looking at me, get Saul. We need eyes where no one's watching. That meant surveillance. Wolfe wasn't calling specs anymore. He was baiting them, ready for the next turn in the trap. You'd think with Saul Panzer on the case, we were running a federal operation, not sniffing around. A kitchen conspiracy involving tarts. But that's the thing with Saul. He works with the same quiet effugency, whether it's embezzlement, infidelity, or misplaced meringue. Wolfe gave him the assignment, without standing, of course, just a low murmur about unobserved ingress and patterns of movement between midnight and dawn. Translation: someone was slipping into Claire's station when they shouldn't been. Wolfe wanted to know who, when, and what they were leaving behind, while Sago, eyes on Pavin's dark hours. I was tasked with the more diplomatic first in daylight. Eavesdropping and casual interruption. Wolfe suspected someone had crossed a line. Not in a dramatic, swinging a sledgehammer kind of way, but more like slipping a teaspoon from the rack and returning it bent, the kind of move that doesn't make noise, but makes ripples. So I returned to Pavinette on a Monday morning, pretending to be a brand consultant, researching trends in artisanal desserts. The lie held water because E sided with a straight face and had the good sense not to wear a tie. Claire looked tired. She was wearing her whites, but they looked more like armor than a uniform. Her hands moved mechanicalous, coating candied lemon peel into delicate curls on top of what I guess that was. An almond tore her smile when it came was automatic and about 4 watts dimmer than it had been last week. Did you change recipes? I asked. No, she said, but someone else has. I blinked, meaning, looked around, made sure no one was listening, and said, taste it. She handed a small spoonful of pale yellow custard. I tasted. Starchuck, smooth as silk. Then she handed me another spoonful from a different container. I tasted again. Slightly duller, still good, but it didn't sparkle like it'd been made. From memory, not from passion. That's not mine, she said. It's a replica. I found it in my fridge drawer this morning next to mine. I stared at him. Someone made a fake version of your lemon custard and planted it next to their O1Y. That's what I need Wolfe to figure out. I didn't say it, but I could guess if a client, judge, or investor tasted the wrong one. Claire would look inconsist, maybe incompetent, just enough to see doubt. Wolfe had called Ithis. Wasn't about sabotage, it was about precision, character erosion, and now, he thought, escalated back at the brownstone. I relayed the custard incident to Wolfe, listened, with his head tilted back and his eyes closed away. He does when processing treachery, like it's music replicating a flavor profile. With that degree of accuracy, he said, would require observation, access, possibly notes. Shit keeps a recipe journal, said, private, handwritten. No backups. Wolfe's eyes snapped open. Then, that he said, is what has been tampered with. I frowned. You'd think they've copied her recipe book, not copied, used incrementally in moments to mimic her process, not all at once, but gradually and with enough fidelity to distort the line between authenticity and imitation. It was classic Wolfe dramatic conclusion stated without dramatic relief. I'll ask her about the book. I said no. Do not ask, observe. Got it, Ansel. He will report tonight. In the meantime, re-engage with Mr. Fallon. Apply pressure, lightly. So I found Fallon again. He was at a wine bar in Tribeca. Tinga, stemmed glass, and talking to someone who looked like a publicist and moved like a threat. I waited until he was alone, then slid into the stool next to him, still drinking. It's 29 in broad daylight. I said, that startup life must be exhausting. He looked like he wanted to ignore me, but couldn't. You shouldn't be here, neither should you. I said, brother, we are. He took a sip, composed himself. His Claire? All right, define all right, I said. She's replicating tarts and finding duplicates in her fridge. His glass paused. Okay. Mid-air, I leaned in. Someone's using her own recipes against her. Someone with access and familiarity. Okay. I haven't. He stopped himself. Yeah, that's what I thought. He swallowed. She used. She shared everything with me. Notes, techniques, flavor tests. Then she stopped. Got guarded. Can you blame her? He didn't answer, but his face told me he had it. I left it there. No point pushing too hard. Not yet. Wolfe didn't want blood. He wanted his comfort that night. Saul came by at 8:40 p.m. As regular as dessert at a Swiss boarding school. He sat in the red armchair and handed Wolfe a single type sheet to entries between midnight at 3 a.m. He said, 1 3 nights ago, 1 last night. Who? Wolfe asked, not looking up from the page. First was Derek Fallon. Second was Simone Dalla, that got false eyebrows to lift barely Dalla. Uncle said she's been neutral this whole time. Saul shook his head. She's quiet, not neutral, and she wasn't in Claire's bathroom or the storage room, but she left with something under her coat. What couldn't see? Wolfe spoke softly, but she does have access to everything, including logs. Meaning, I ask, meaning she knows what we know, Wolfe said. And she knows one? We know it. I turned to Saul. You think she's manipulating? The log system, Saul shrugged. Wouldn't be hard. She's the administrator. Wolfe stood. Then if you're counting, makes 2 vertical moves in 1 week, a record someone has tampered with. That recipe journal, he said. I want it unaltered, unredacted ID. Want me to steal it? I want you to recover it before it disappears. Wolfe said the distinction is philosophical. I nodded, grabbed my coat, but before I left, Fritz called us into the kitchen. You should see this, he said, holding up a spice jar. It was labeled sumac, a lemon-eared powder used in Middle Eastern cooking. Claire had mentioned she used it to balance acidity without overpowering sweetness. This isn't sumac, Fritz said. Wolfe sniffed. It's tamarind, he said, flatly inferior, intentionally substituted. I turned to him. You think? Claire's ingredients were tampered with here before the tart even left this house. You think? Wolfe said. We are dealing with someone who wants Claire discredited from the inside out, and now they've tried to make me their accomplice. He stared at the jar like it was a loaded gun. "No more waiting," he said. "Bring them all here tomorrow." We had a full board: motives, movements, misdirection. Wolfe was ready to dealt cards. Up next, it started with a phone call. Not the dramatic kind with gasps and deadlines, but the soft click and hum of Genevieve Worley at 7:02 E. Masking me in her crisp morning voice. Weather. "I'd been," declares a pert mental Verneth. "No," I said. "I was tucked in with Toltoy and bourbon." "Why, her apartment was broken into," she replied. Nothing was taken, but something was moved that gotten fully upright. What exactly her recipe? Journal. Someone turned every page carefully. Enough. I was in my coat before she hung up. Claire's place was in a modest walk-up near Union Square, the kind of building where the walls know your footsteps and the neighbors know your mail. She looked pale when she opened the door, but not scared. Resigned, maybe. I glanced around this kitchen. Nothing overturned, nothing broken, no signs of forced entry. Kata was a faint smelled cardboard and lemon oil. It's a kind of scent that gets into your nails and into your nerves. She pointed to the table. The journal was there, closed neatly with a single strip of yellow ribbon poking out her bookmark. "I never leave it like that," she said. The ribbon's decorative eye dog-eared the pages. I flipped through the book. She was right. Every page had been turned. Could feel it, the loosened stiffness, the slight warp of recently handled paper. Whoever did it was gentle, but not invisible. The lock. I asked. She pointed to a drawer under the counter. At that, a clean snap, like someone had used leverage. Instead of force, not dramatic, not even noticeable, unless you knew what to look for. The only other thing in there, she said, was my pastry thermometer. Still, okay. There, she nodded, but we both knew that wasn't the point. But Cat, the brownstone wolf, was unimpressed. A drawer broken, a journal disturbed, he said. Small tremors before the quake, but it proves. Squint's watching her, not just sabotaging her prep, studying her closely. Indeed, he saddened. I intend to reverse the observation. He turned to Saul, who was seated. With his usual compact stillness, I want to tally on Simone Doka and Derek Fallon, alternate every 12 hours. Screet, Pethoro, any reason to think they're working together? Saul asked. Snubble Wolf said, but one of them is working with someone and the others. Wolf's eyes narrowed. Still possible, but I believe in the economy of suspicion. That was Wolf's why-up, saying he'd started closing the circle. I went back to Pavanette. It's afternoon under the pretense of taste analysis benchmarking, which, in plain English, means I hung around and watched people sweat. Trina gave me side-eye from her glass perch. Milo ignored me entirely, and Rowan Bell offered me a complimentary fright. No one had asked for Claire didn't show. Instead, I spotted Fallon in her bay again. This time, he wasn't alone. He was talking to Simone. Close, low voices, then something passed between them, too quick to photograph, too subtle to describe. It might have been a note, a USB-A receipt, or nothing, but they didn't see me. I left without being noticed and called. Saul, change of plan. I said, don't alternative over. Them both simultaneously on it, he replied. Wolf agreed reluctantly. He hated throwing more resources at a problem, unless serotonin was guaranteed, but the proximity of those two, of Dalla and Fallon, told him something he hadn't quite said out loud yet, that they weren't working alone, they were working together that evening. Wolf summoned Genevieve back to the office. She arrived in sable gloves and a fresh sense of indignation. He's trying to destroy her, she said flatly. Mr. Fallon? Wolf asked. She nodded. He's been speaking to investors quietly, without Claire. What is he offering them? Wolf asked her. Manouche said. Repackaged, rebranded, in a name. She hesitated. Citronade. But, without her, Wolf made a low sound, half exhale, half disgust. So he murmured the sabotages. sabotage, its misdirection. It's a corporate divorce that made sense. Wolfe had caught it early. This wasn't passion, it was strategy. Fallon discredits her, she self-doubts. The business fractures and he walks off with the intellectual property, I said. Clean, efficient, not clean. Wolfe corrected. Claire has not yet collapsed. She is in fact demonstrating a resilience Mr. Fallon had not anticipated, which is why they've escalated. I added from kitchen tricks to surveillance to a break-in, and soon, Wolfe said softly, they will push again. Genevieve leaned forward. What are you going to do? Wolfe didn't answer her. Instead, he looked at me. Get her recipe journal. Act quiet. We already have it. No, he said. Get it again, the current one, as it is. No, bring it here. Why? Because he said I intend to replicate their application. Claire handed me the book that evening. Reluctantly, I brought it to Wolfe, who began cross-referencing it page by page against the Tart. We had tasted and the notes Genevieve had initially brought. That's when we found it. One entry, her signature lemon glaze, had been modified slightly imperceptibly. Temperature note had been changed by 3, arresting time reduced by 20 seconds. It's not enough to ruin it, just enough to alter the texture. Claire hadn't done it, but Samiane had. Who had access? I asked Wolfe. He turned to me, eyes glinting. Access, said. All of them. That was the trick. But motive? He tapped the journal. Only one at 9:43 p.m. Saul Callahan followed Fallon to a bar uptown, then to a hotel, then watched him hand EOSB to a man in a tailored jacket and no tie, one of Fallon's backers. What was on it? I asked. Couldn't see. Saul said, but I got close. Label read, Citron. Rev, CFF, INAL, PDF. I didn't need Wolfe to translate to finalize branding materials. He wasn't just taking her recipes, he was launching them without her. Wolfe didn't speak when I told him. He just turned to the phone and made a single call, to whom I asked afterward. Saul again, he said. We'll confront them tomorrow. All of them. Yes, Wolfe said. Here, even. It's Fallon, especially Fallon. Then he leaned back, laced his fingers, and said, the trap is set in the Wolfe household. When invitations are issued, they're not written, scented, or optional. They're spoken by me, noted by, and usually met with confusion, suspicion, or outright dread. This time, I had 5 names, 1 living room, and the slow burn of Nero Wolfe's indignation simmering. On low, each suspect was summoned for 11:08 m sharp, and each was told, truthfully, that Wolfe intended to review the matter of professional conflict and culinary comprise, which is, Wolfe speak for you being cornered, and you'll thank me later for not using handcuffs. At 10:52, I set out the chairs. Wolfe doesn't like group confrontations. He prefers tete-a-tete, one fencing matches where language is the sword. But this time, these suspects needed to feel the presence of one another to sweat together. Linopause as follows. Milo Crane, professionally, disheveled, wearing a double-breasted chuff coat, like it had survived a kitchen fire and lived to tell about it. Trinasha, immaculate in navy, with a digital notebook and a smirk that said she wasn't ready, drafting the press release. Rowan Bell, nervously, holding an art book that might have been a prop or a pacifier. Simone Dela, efficient as ever, standing instead of sitting, scanning the room, like she'd rather log it than live in it. Derek Fallon, calm, polite, and just smeg enough to imply he'd already won. Claire and Genevieve were present, Tuzeland, flanking Wolfe's chair. Like human parentheses, I stood behind. Wolfe, ready to observe, interrupt, or interject. Wolfe, for his part, did Majin. Immediately, he let the silence marinate. Only when the fidgeting reached peacock wordness did he speak. You were here because something delicate has been disturbed, he said, and because I dislike being used. Fallon offered a placid smile. I'm sorry, Mr. Wolfe, but I'm not sure. Do not speak unless I invite it, Wolfe said. Without raising his voice, Yahave had ample opportunity to lie elsewhere. Okay, that shut him up. Wolf, Tornetto, the room Claire Leventhal's recipes, her intellectual properties, have been examined, replicated, and quietly modified to create facsimile of talent, not as a compliment, as a theft, and that theft was used to damage her reputation while launching a separate brand initiative. Without her hapaused, I find this offensive. No one moved. I do not need to convince you of Claire's competence. Wolfe went on. She was not targeted because she failed. She was targeted because she succeeded. He let that one sit. Then, Istala. She looked up. You've accessed Povan's surveillance logs without repeating Union. After hours movement, her eyes narrowed. It's not unusual for people to come and go. Chefs work strange hours indeed, and do building managers typically deliver speeds to investors. That caught her. She glanced at Fallon. Quick instinctive Wolf saw it. Ah, he said. Mr. Fallon, you recruited her. Fallon didn't deny it. I asked her to protect my private business meetings. Pov's investors have proprietary interests. Indeed, Wolf said again. And what were you selling them? Fallon straightened. My version of citronade. You mean Claire's version? He adjusted her ideas, reframed. Then that's not theft. That's iteration. You also entered her station at night. I say twice. For inventory purposes. Wolf gave him a look like a cat eyeing a stale sardine. Mr. Fallon, you changed her journal, her recipes, slightly. Enough to undermine her work without drawing attention. You counted on her pride and her fear of appearing paranoid. Fallon's composure wavered. You can't prove that, no, Wolf said. But I can prove Yao attempted to launch a product line with digital files, labeled Citron, Rev, Spheno, which you handed off to a bagger last night. Witnessed by Mr. Panzer. Fallon's lips parted closed again. Wolf shifted his gaze. Miss Shaw, you enabled T's. Trina looked taken aback. Me? I had no idea you did, Wolf said. You saw the inconsistencies. You coached the branding. You used your position to steer attention away from Claire and toward Derek. Trina opened her mouth. Do not insult me, Wolf said flatly. He turned to Rowan. Mr. Bell, you substituted ingredients on 2 occasions. You claim it was accident, but your delivery logs show gaps. What was promised did not match what was delivered. Rowan flushed. She asked me to. He stopped, looked at Fallon. There it was. Ripple Wolf saw. It pressed. She asked, you Wolf? Echoed, or he did. Rowan sank into his chair. I thought it was just a flavor test, he muttered. Derek said it would be harmless. Wolf leaned back. So, we have conspiracy. No one spoke. Claire sat still, but her hands folded in her lap. Were trembling. Wolf, ever the tactician, believed. His final thrust. This is not a courtroom. I offer no legal verdict. But, Ito offer consequence. Claire will resume full rights to her brand, her kitchen, and her recipes. You will not challenge. Okay? This, you will not contest ownership or have paused. I will forward a detailed report of surveillance, ingredient tampering, and proprietary appropriation to the relevant licensing boards and investor bodies, including a certain hotel meeting captured in high-resolution detail. Fallon's jaw set. Trina looked away. Simone stood even straighter, if possible. Rowan, Cal, exhaled like he'd been holding it since breakfast. Is that clear? Wolf asked. Murmurs of agreement, nods, guilt in high definition. Wolf closed high sighs. Leave. They did all of them. The house was quiet again. Genevieve Lingeretta. Moment you could have destroyed them, she said. Wolf opened one eye. They weren't worth the bother. She smiled to Claire. Rose walked over, placed a smallier on Wolf's desk. It was filled with a pale lemon glaze. The real one, she said. Wolf nodded once. After they left, I poured myself a small celebratory bourbon and leaned in the doorway. You took your time. I said I wanted them tell stew. Wolfe replied. You think they'll stay quiet? Yes, and if they don't, you'll eat them. Alive? No, he said. I'll let Claire do it. Then he added almost to himself. Culinary revenge is best served cold, preferably with zest, at 11:59. The following day, the suspects returned. Some came because they had toothers, because they couldn't help themselves. Ego is a powerful motivator, so his fear. They walked into Wolfe's office one by one, subdued and sharper around the edge. His room had been arranged to Wolfe's exacting specifications. His desk immaculate, the Persian rugs freshly vacuumed, and chairs positioned in a semicircle like confessionals in a court that didn't deal in prayer. Wolfe didn't rise. He never does. Stood near the globe. It never spins. Claire Leventhal was already seated, poised and composed though. I could sit, inch it in her shoulders. Genevieve stood near the bookcase, unreadable, but alert like a statue that knew when to blink. Wolfe gave no preamble. He simply began. This gathering is not for dramatic effect, he said, though I have been accused of favoring theatrics, rather itis, to resolve an intellectual injustice, and to make that resolution of a call. Trina Shaw crossed her legs. Slowly Fallon folded his arms. Rowan Bell kept his hands in his lap. Simone. Dalla, typically stone-faced, glanced at Theodore. Once, just once, as if confirming her exit strategy. Wolfe continued. You are our participants in the operations of a culinary startup, a high-pressure, high-visibility space where originality is currency, and envy the exchange rate. A slight shift of his tone, like a pinch-off spice mist. Leventhal's work was not merely copied, it was mirrored, mimicked with precision, and then subtly degraded. This was not culinary critique, it was calculated sabotage. Trina inhaled through her teeth. I will not waste your time detailing every infraction, Wolfe said. Instead, I will show you. A gesture to me. I stepped forward with 2 covered trays. On each were identical mint tarts. I had Fritz prepare these, Wolfe said, using 2 separate sets of instructions, one from Miss Leventhal's original journal and one from the altered version found in her apartment following a suspicious midnight visit. He looked at Fallon. Which you didn't request, and Fallon didn't reply. Smart now, Wolfe said. We taste. He gestured toward Claire, who rose removed the lids and sliced each tart. Each of the suspects received a small plate. 2 bites, side by side, please, Wolfe said. Indulge. They did. One tart was luminous, balanced, bright, smooth. The other was nearly identical, nearly slightly waxy, fainter acidity, a subtle dullness that lingered on the tongue like an afterthought when they finished. Wolfe spoke again. Miss Leventhal, he said, confirm for them which is yours. She added, pointing without hesitation. The other, Wolfe said, was made from the altered recipe, the version you never wrote. Rowan blinked. Trina looked at her empty plate like it had insulted her. Simone's jaw tightened. Fallon said nothing. Wolfe let the weight of the proof settle before continuing. Mr. Fallon, he said, you had access to Miss Leventhal's journal. You visited her workstation after hours. You conspired with Miss Dalla to adjust surveillance logs. You used Mr. Bell to subtly sway ingredients, most notably sumac for tamarind, in at least 2 deliveries. Yodeled him it was for testing purposes. He believed you. Rowan flinched. Wolfe barely acknowledged it. Miss Shaw, he said, you had no hand in the alterations, but you had knowledge. You saw what was binding. You assisted Mr. Fallon in creating marketing materials based on Claire's work material. You knew she had not authorized. Trina's jaw moved, but she didn't speak. That was a first miss. Dalla, Wolfe said, you facilitated access. You made in silence. You manipulated logs that should have raised red flags. Hadn't asked for explanations. He offered none. Wolfe isn't a judge and he doesn't bargain. He concludes. Miss Leventhal has agreed not to press charges, he said, but the conditions are these all branding related to Citronade will revert to her. All documentation prepared without her consent will be withdrawn, and none of you will publicly or privately question the authorship of her recipes again. He waited. Fallon shifted. You have no legal authority. No, Wolfe said, but I have something you'll fear. More documentation, screenshots, surveillance logs, notes, and a written statement from Mr. Bell, who I might add regrets his involvement deeply. Rowan's head bowed. He didn't argue. Wolfe's voice dropped an octave. I also have contacts. One of them owns a modest chain of boutique dining clubs. Another sits on the advisory board for a rather influential culinary school. Both will find this report interesting, and neither tolerates intellectual theft. Silence. Simone de la stood first. She said nothing, just nodded once and left in Rome. Then Trina Fallon lingered. I gave her everything, he said. Wolfe lifted unebrowed. No, he said, you took everything and you misused it. Miss Lavendal gave you her trust. That is not a thing to be returned half-eaten. Fallon left. The office door closed. Wolfe exhaled. Once Genevieve approached. You've done it, she said. No, Wolfe replied. Claire did. Claire stepped forward. Thank you. Wolfe nodded once, solemn and sincere, then waved a hand. Dismissive. Ya will not need me again. That is the true measure of success. Later, over beer and beef. Wolfe said nothing for a long time. He sat with the evening paper and a half-eaten biscuit, and I figured he was done with the subject. But as I stood Toclier, the plates, he spoke. Archie. Yeah. There are two kinds of theft, he said. Theft of substance and theft of soul. The former you can reclaim, the latter must be rebuilt. That what happened here? I nodded. Just once. Miss Leventhal will be better for it. The others will let them chew their regrets. And the Tart, he glanced toward the kitchen. Fritz has Therasype and Genevieve. Wolfe's eyes didn't move from the paper. She still knows how to provoke me, he said. That is no small thing. Then softer with the faintest curl off his lip. But I am not easily trapped. The brownstone was quiet again. That might not sound like much, but around here, silence is a kind of liturgy. You don't break it without cause, and when it returns, it comes with weight. After 10 days of suspects, sabotage, and sub-parted replicas, the silence was the best thing we'd tasted. Wolfe had resumed his routine like nothing had happened that morning. He was in the plant rooms from 9 until 11 o'clock, speaking softly to a pneumotonia that apparently had trust issues. At lunch, Fritz prepared a cold chicken salad with tag and mayonnaise and small pickled pears. Wolfe didn't commit, which was how you knew he was pleased. Dion, the other hand, had a minor case of what you might call post-case compression. It's what happens after a week of non-stop observation, lying and navigating kitchen egos big enough to require valet service. You walk into your own office and expect to find hidden microphones under the lamp or tempered paprika in the spice drawer. View to everything was where it should be, even Wolfe. It wasn't until after lunch over Kafitha he brought it up. She will not thank me, he said. I set my mug down. Claire. He nodded. Nor should she. You saved her business. I corrected an imbalance. That is not gratitude. That is restoration. I leaned against the edge of my desk. She won't forget it. She must have said. That is the cost of resilience. I gave him a sideways look. You've been benching on that line since breakfast, haven't you? He didn't smile, but his mouth twitched in that subtle way. That meant I wasn't wrong. What about Fallon? I asked. Think he'll try again under a new name? He may, Wolfe said, but if he does, he will fail. A thief who relies on stolen brilliance can only shine in borrowed light. Poetic, practical, he corrected Miss Leventhal. Will outlast him. Her virtue was not the Tart. It was the technique, the idea. I had to hand it to him. He wasn't just right. He was right in Wolfitch, is to say both infuriating and deadened. Genevieve had left the night before. Without ceremony, she thanked Wolfe at the door, didn't linger, and didn't look back. That told me more than a speech. What if I asked you things, she said. The whole thing in motion. Knew you'd take the baits. She brought me the tart, he said, not as an offering, as a puzzle. Check. Knew what would provoke you. She always did, Wolfe said. Then, after a pause, she also knew I would not refuse, because of her, because of the injustice, he said. Beauties. She made it personal. I sat in the red armchair, stretched my legs. You could have sent her away. I should have, Wolfe said, but I am not immune to unfinished busness. And there it was, the rare admission, a ripple in the pond I didn't push. You don't poke a tiger when it's being sentimental. We sat in silence. Few minutes more outside Manhattan mumbled and buzzed the way it always does. Inside the brownstone returned to Toits. Sacred rhythm. No trespasses, no lemon traps, no false tarts, just two men in Orchid House, and the kind of quiet that feels earned. As I stood to stretch, Fritz appeared at the door. Would you like dessert? He asked. I made the lemon tart again. Wolfe blinked once. No. I raised my eyebrows. No. After all that I've had my fill of lemon for the week. Sid, let the taste fade. That's the only way to miss it properly. He turned applique of his book. Something by Plutarch. Naturally, I nodded to Fritz. Make mine a double. As Fritz disappeared into the kitchen, Wolfe said, without looking up. You, Archie, are like lemon zest. Useful, sharp, occasionally verse. And you, I said, grabbing my coffee, are like cremungle dense, rich and best, served with restraint. He made a sound halfway between a grunt and a chuckle. That's as close as we ever get a toast at the end. Nero Wolfe and the lemon tart Trapecassiaf. Precision, betrayal, and just desserts. Thank you for following this Valenth Nero Wolfe. Mystery. Would you like a compiled version formatted for export or print? A second mystery with a fresh title? And hook, or a summary of character arcs and key deductions. 2 weeks later, things were so quiet around the brownstone, you could have staged a meditation retreat. Wolfe was back to his books, his beer and Heiserchits. The only scents in the air were sandalwood from the library and something herbaceous Fritz, wassomering in the kitchen that I couldn't identify and was afraid to ask about. As for me, I was catching up on reports. We didn't actually need an invoice, as Woolden actually contest, because Wolfe never haggled unless principle was involved, and ingredient fraud didn't qualify as taxable. Then the envelope came thick, paper hand addressed, sealed with real wax, very Geneva, very old school, and very unwelcome. I brought Ito Wolfe. Just before lunch, he was at his desk reading Montaigne again and working his way through an alarming amount of Stilton on rye. Another letter from my eyesight, dropping it on the blotter. Wolfe didn't move. I can open it. I offered, knowing full well he wouldn't want me to. He still didn't move, but he did flick his fingers in the international gesture for "oh, very well, if you must." I cracked the seal, unfolded the parchment. Yes, it was actual parchment promptly. Genevieve by stationery from the 18th century. And read aloud, Nero, you remain, as ever, intolerable and indispensable. Claire is thriving her first new line, independent of all prior attachments. Debuted last night at Wascald Reclamation Fitting. I didn't attend. I don't need to see the root stake hold to know they've been planted properly. You will never admit it. But I suspect you enjoyed this, at least the mental gymnastics. I still remembered that night, in fact, when you solved the menu theft bee, taste alone. I thought you a monster, then I think. Slightly more human now. Yours in memory, if not appetite too. GWI folded the letter and looked up. You going to reply no Wolfe? Said, chewing methodically, because you're annoyed, or because she's right. She's always right. He said, that is trouble. I stared. You miss her. I miss people the way a cat misses water. When I'm forced to remember it exists. Well, I said, if if I ever start sending you letters, sealed in wax, please shoot me. I would never shoot you, Wolfe said. Mildly, I would suddenly hire someone else. Claire did stop by once. No fare, no tart, just a plain envelope with 2 tickets to a pastry symposium. Being hosted uptown under the new Citronade label, fully restored, 1 ticket had Wolfe's name on it, in calligraphy. The other said, "Plusen only, if you must." Wolfe stared at them on the desk for a full 5 minutisbori, sliding them into the wastebasket without a word, not going. "I, Skitty, have already tasted the tart," he said. "What more is there?" She invited you shed a word. "Justice, that is, thanks enough." He didn't sound bitter, just full, like a man who'd eaten a heavy meal and found dessert optional. I didn't press. He'd had his taste, so had she, and Wolfe, despite his insistence that Thorold turn at his pace, had allowed someone else's victory to stand on its own legs. That, my friends, is growth for a Wolfe. Anyway, there was one last twist though, Fritz, that sneaky wizard. Dizzy the dough, remake the lemon tart using Claire's original ratios, the real ones, not from Sabotage Journal, not from the Postelvary version. He found the notes somewhere in his culinary archive. He'd kept a scratch copy back when he first read, to replicate it from taste alone before Wolfe ever agreed to take Thaka's. Fritz presented the final tart on a Sunday afternoon with no warning. Andy Van, less fanfare, just a plate on the table and a single unspoken dare. Wolfe took 1 bite, closed his eyes, and sighed. "I stand corrected," he said softly, meaning, "I asked." "It is possible," he said, to begin again. That evening, I watched from the dining room as Wolfe trimmed the roots unknown of his orchids, a Pathopodon he hadn't touched in months. It was delicate apples and shaped like a slipper. One of the slow growers. I leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "You name it, that one up," he said, inspecting a leaf. "It already has a name." I waited. He looked up. "Genevieve," he said. "Then it blooms, rarely, but when it does, you remember why you waited. So yes, cases come and go. Suspectly victims panic. Wolfe scowls. I pace. But every so often, a tart shows up at Theodore, and the world shifts, not because of the flavor, because of the motive.